You're a far-right thug, to be honest, according to Sir Keir Starmer, aren't you? Because you're calling for, a grooming gangs inquiry. You have indeed been campaigning for this since 2021. What do you make of Keir Starmer saying that there's a far-right bandwagon?
Well, it just shows, in my view, how out of touch our Prime Minister is, that he's having to use this type of rhetoric to cover up effectively what is has been a very, very serious issue for decades. I'm lucky enough to represent Keighley, as was Anne Cryer, who was a predecessor of mine, a Labour MP, who back in the 1990s was a sole voice on calling this issue out exactly for what it is, a minority of Pakistani men targeting white young children. And let's be honest, there has not been sufficient enough progress since then, particularly across the Bradford district, of which Keighley, as a constituency that I represent, is encompassed within.
So, of course, when these sorts of subjects start, Robbie, everybody jumps on the bandwagon, to excuse the Keir Starmer pun for a second. The bedwetters, as I call them, will say that's being racist. You're saying that this is just British Pakistani men. I approach this very straight. In Rotherham, in Oldham, in Rochdale, 8 years to bring people to justice. And the police, by their own admission at the end, were saying, and I quote, "We were worried about, stirring up cultural division and causing problems." For me, that's not how you police. If you break the law, you suffer the consequences of the rules that you face if you break the law. Do we fear that very little has been done because of those reasons? And why, and this is what I really would love to get to today, why, if it's been going on, in your words, for decades, Robbie, have successive governments seemingly decided to sweep this under the carpet? Because that will tell me, and a lot of other people, that this goes much deeper, much higher, and is much more scandalous than perhaps any of us can possibly begin to imagine.
Well, there's 2 points that I'd very much like to make here. One is the rhetoric around of what the Prime Minister has used, using this as far right, using that term, and also everyone jumping on the bandwagon. Incredibly frustrating, because what it actually does is distracts from the main issue that is going on here. Because anyone that is then branded as far right is then put into a box, so to speak, of not being able to feel that they can talk about this issue. And the real concern that I have is that unless you have sensible people that are willing to take control of the narrative and get to grips with the actual issue, as I outlined here, of those challenges, like in my constituency, like in Rotherham, Oldham, Telford, where it had been specifically identified as a minority of British Pakistani men that had been targeting white young children. Unless you have sensible people that are controlling that narrative, then you do allow the likes of what happened in my seat in 2005, Nick Griffin, the leader of the BNP, standing to be the Member of Parliament in Keighley, but because of the reasons of this issue. So therefore, politicians need to sensibly take control of this narrative. And I'm frustrated that I've been talking about this issue since 2019, when I first got elected representing Keighley, calling for an inquiry into child sexual exploitation across the Bradford district, that has not happened yet. Secondly, this should not be about politics. This is absolutely the difference between right and wrong. This should not be about one party taking on the other. This should be about our survivors, our victims, and our families who have experienced these horrific crimes.
And actually, if I could jump in, Robbie, you're absolutely right. It's not about politics. It's about the difference between right and wrong in a civilised society. Because rest assured, I would hope and I would pray that if we heard some of what's gone on in these areas in other countries, we would describe it in appalling terms: barbaric, disgusting. Let's just look at the very essence of this. Let's get away from it's British Pakistani men. There are children being sexually abused and groomed to be sexually abused, and decades, you said. So successive governments have failed to implement reports or done anything about it. Why, oh why, did your government, since you were elected, do nothing about this? I think it's a very salient question.
I think it's a perfect question to ask. The ICSA review was set up, quite rightly, triggered by the then Home Secretary Theresa May. We've seen those recommendations that came out in 2022, of which I've called for all of those recommendations to be implemented in full previously. It was an excellent piece of work that was done, but what it did not do was focus specifically on rape gangs and this specific issue of ethnicity and the complexities associated with that when you're looking at the perpetrator and the victims who need to be absolutely at the heart of that, which is why I believe it is necessary that a national inquiry specifically looking at gangs is called. And I would very much like to see the government do that with specific attention given to the Bradford district, which is something that I've been calling for.
Do you feel let down that your government, your party, the one that you were elected to in 2019, didn't implement it? I'm not sticking up for Starmer. I quite like Jess Phillips. People might not understand that, but I think she's done quite a bit for safeguarding, and I think she's getting the rough end of the stick. And I also believe that she's being probably forced to not do anything because we know who the Director of Public Prosecutions was in 2008. I want to know from you why Boris bloody Johnson, why Rishi Sunak, why Liz Truss did not implement a national inquiry as much as Keir Starmer, with respect.
Well, I mean, I got elected in 19 and I've been calling for an inquiry since the day of getting elected. I've spoken on this issue about 40 times, I think, since I was elected in 2019. My view on this is very clear, that we need to absolutely explore those complexities and provide that reassurance to survivors. I was very pleased that we rolled out the task force under the Rishi administration with the ethnicity data being collected. But let's be frank, that should have happened a long time ago. I am pleased that this is now getting the national headlines right now, but frustrated that it has taken so long. Governments, or should I say the state, the British state, whether it be national government or local government, in my view, has failed those victims, those families, those survivors for far too long. And it is now is the time that we need to address this issue head on. The government needs to back the call for a national...
Why do you think the government won't back it right now, Robbie?
Well, I don't know. I mean, let's be honest about this. They should do. They obviously seem to be relying on the ICSA report and the recommendations of that, which, again, it was a very good report, good recommendations that need to be acted in full. But it, as I've already outlined, it did not go far enough in specifically focusing on the on gang raping. It only looked at 6 towns, 2 of which were in the north. It never focused Durham and St Helens. It never even focused on West Yorkshire. It only referred to the word Rotherham once, the word Pakistani once in a footnote. So that is why I'm saying it did not go far enough in looking at those complexities, which is why we need it. And further to that, what I would like to see is a national inquiry that specifically relates to convictions that must take place.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. What I was talking to somebody yesterday, I can't remember who it was because I'm getting old, and they were saying that it seems that politicians are almost blind and deaf to what the British public are interested in right now. The 2 big issues in today, in the last few weeks, immigration, we know that, we'll talk about it in a minute. This grooming gang fiasco, debacle, has captured the imagination. Why do you think the Prime Minister wouldn't absolutely buy some political capital right now and go, yeah, we're going to have a national inquiry? Why? I don't understand. It's an absolute no-brainer unless it goes higher, it goes deeper, and too many, I don't know, people in the past have got their thing. I don't know. I don't understand it, mate.
What's really important is this disenfranchisement that absolutely exists between those survivors, those families, and the British state is incredibly huge. They don't feel that the British state is on side. The one thing that the Prime Minister has in his gift is to be able to is to enact a national inquiry, which is what those victims are doing. Why is he not doing that? God only knows.
Yeah.
But what I am absolutely sure of is in his response at the press conference yesterday, he looked weak, he looked nervous, he did not look like he had the strength of the Prime Minister on this issue that we would all hope to...
Let's cut to the chase then. Some will say it's because he was the Director of Public Prosecutions. Others are saying that in the last election, this is not racist before the bedwetters jump on, this is factual. There were certain areas in this country, Muslim areas, where independent MPs, Jonathan Ashworth, who I would consider a friend, actually, who'd been on the show many, many times, would have been in the cabinet, lost his seat by 900 votes to an independent a Muslim MP whose sole mantra in that campaign was about Gaza. Nothing to do with the local community, nothing to do with these grooming gangs, nothing to do with things that affected people. There are people saying that the reason Starmer will not go anywhere near a national inquiry is because it would actually then cause him more problems with that part of the electorate that he needs to keep on side. What's yours and the Tory party's response to that, Robbie?
Well, my view is absolutely this is a factor. This is a consideration. I've had it said to me in my own seat. I've had it said to me by my own constituents that if you raise this issue too much, you run the risk of losing the election. And I'm sure previous MPs that have held seats of Keighley, but also others, have been told exactly the same thing. But if you're a good MP and you're wanting to stand up for your constituents, that shouldn't matter. This is about doing the right thing based on your core values and based on proper justice for those victims, and which is why I have gone so strong on this since 2019 when I got elected to represent Keighley, because this is the difference between right and wrong. And Cryer, who I've mentioned previously, was the last Labour MP that also represented Keighley and did the right thing. Unfortunately, other local politicians have not necessarily been robust enough on this issue, and particularly at a local level. The local leaders on Bradford Council, even our West Yorkshire Mayor, are not backing my calls for an independent inquiry.
Well, I think everybody with a brain cell would back the call. Can I just move it on to the other subject I'd like to touch upon with you, Robbie? Really good to have you on today. Robert Jenrick talking really tough on immigration today, backed by your new boss, Kemi Badenoch. He said, and I quote this morning, and of course this has been jumped on by many about the words used. He said that the Tories in government would seek to limit immigration to the UK from what he described as alien cultures. The Shadow Justice Secretary said that we have seen millions of people enter the UK in recent years, and some of them have backward, frankly, medieval attitudes to women. He stood by his claim that the grooming gang scandal started with the onset of mass migration. What's your response to that, Robbie Moore?
Well, again, at a local level, based on my own experiences, this issue was raised 2 decades ago in Keighley to do with gang rapes and gang-related grooming and the challenges associated with ethnicity. That obviously resulted in Rotherham happening, where there was a very damning report specifically on this issue. Robert Jenrick makes some points at the dispatch box there that absolutely resonate, unfortunately, with seats like mine in Keighley and those across the wider Bradford district. I do feel that we need to, when we are having the conversations on those about rape gangs or wider challenges to do with child sexual exploitation, no matter how any child is lured into this very heinous crime, all the issues around drug distribution that is also linked to child sexual exploitation, that the points that Robert made at the dispatch box are properly looked at, because they certainly resonate with constituencies like mine in the Bradford district.
I think it's very interesting, and I think I just want to go back to finish with something that you said, that as a society, morally, we have a right to protect children. They're innocent. I have 6 children. To me, this is abhorrent. I can't even begin to imagine how, not you and I, but how on a wider scale there seems to be stuff in the newspapers and on most news networks all about, you know, what's right and wrong about a public inquiry. Can we just cut to the chase? This is disgusting, abhorrent behaviour. People who do this should be locked up, incarcerated forever. These are innocent young children. These are not informed choices. This is grooming, exploitation, and has the most awful effect on these children forever. And I think we all have a right, a responsibility in society to call this out and do whatever. But I do believe, genuinely hand on heart, that this goes higher. I don't believe there can have been this sort of wall of silence for so goddamn long about something that is so, to me, abhorrent, that nobody's done anything about it, that somebody hasn't said, you know what, I'm going to fight this, I don't care. If there are people in places, in situations, who have turned a blind eye or been complete, whatever, those people have to be found out, Robbie Moore, 1,000,000%, and I'm totally with you. There has to be a public inquiry for the sake of those children, first and foremost, right?
Absolutely, and I just want to reiterate the points that I've made there. I absolutely want to see the Prime Minister enact a full public inquiry that specifically looks at rape gangs. I absolutely want to see that inquiry specifically focus as part of the wider challenges on the Bradford district.
Really, really good to have you on, by the way. Sorry to cut you, but it's 4:20. Good to have you on. We'll get you on many more times as well. Robbie Moore, ilkly and kickly